and I'm gonna have a lot less money when this is all over. I went to college at Michigan Tech. It's an engineering school in the middle of nowhere, Northwoods of Michigan. Ice cold, tons of snow. Every October, there would be a rally that comes to town. This is maybe a 10,000 person town. So we had Travis Pastrana, we had Ken Block, we had Andrew Cummings-Picard, we had David Higgins, and all these guys would show up, sign autographs, and head out to the woods to just, tear the roads up. All three of these guys were running the Subaru Hatch, which is my favorite body style. We would drive out to the woods, ice cold, stand on the side of a road, dead silence for 1 hour, wait for the cars to come. The cars would rip by, and for some reason, I just fell in love with this 600 horsepower rocket ship hatchback. It just looked so good to me. Around that same time, my friend Nichols bought a 2009 hatch, Subaru STi, and I loved it. I was like, wow, this is the real version of the car that I have always hoped to be a part of. And we would get in the car, we would drive out to the same roads they used as the stages, and we would drive down the rally roads just like the Travis Pastrana and everybody else. So I told him, if you ever sell this car, I want to be the first person in line to buy it. Like, this car just spoke to me for some reason. I've never felt a connection like that to a car. So fast forward 7 years to last year, 2017, I get a text from Nichols and he says, "Hey man, selling the hatch, you still want it?" And I immediately said yes. I flew up to Michigan, drove down to Atlanta, did it all in one day. It was a great drive through the Smoky Mountains. On top of the moon, happy. It was great. And a few days later, a few of my friends in Atlanta wanted to go for a ride. Took them for a ride, was driving like I stole it, just beating the crap out of it. Kind of rounding the last corner, about to be home, we heard this terrible noise coming from the engine bay. As I got home and sat there and kind of pushed the gas, I went on YouTube and I typed in Subaru STi rod knock. And I listened to the video and I gave it some gas and I heard the same noise and I was like, oh my gosh, you have to be kidding me. So here I am, just bought a Subaru STi, car that I've always wanted, and I have a blown motor after 5 or 6 days. So I was just torn apart about it. And the car sat for about 4 months before I decided, okay, I should probably bring this back to life. I either had to rebuild the short block that I had, but risk there possibly being chunks of metal or one of the galleys or ports is not clean, and then sending it right back through the new motor. I thought it'd probably be better to either go with a stock OEM short block, which is about $2,000 for a new one. You can get a long block out of a wrecked Subaru, probably $1,000, $1,500 for the long block, including the heads. Or for $3,000 to $3,500, you can get a fully built short block, forged pistons, rods, race bearings. It's good for 750 horsepower. I decided, because of the age of the car, because I had no idea what the future is going to bring, spending the extra, $1,000, $1,500 for future proofing and security was a worthy investment. So as soon as I had it on order, I took my Subaru to a warehouse and started, pulling the motor out. I dropped the oil pan, kind of swished it around. It was like panning for gold. The oil would, collect all the flakes of bearing into one place. I'm going to have to replace the entire oil circuit. Take a look at the turbo, and all of the compressor blades were chipped from, bits flying into the turbo. So I went, oh man, this is, starting to get a little bit more expensive than I anticipated. And I figured while I have the motor out, I might as well get a new clutch, new flywheel. It's a pain to change those things, so I'll just do it right now. And I could either get the stock one, or I could make it match the power level of the turbo and the short block that I just managed to purchase. It was about this time that I realized I'm no longer in control of this build, and I'm going to have a lot less money when this is all over. So I did a whole bunch of research. I looked, if you're going to go for a big power on an EJ motor, the Subaru EJ, you need to do equal length headers to unfortunately get rid of the Subaru rumble, external wastegate, boost controller, E85, fuel rails, pump lines, everything. When I saw this build list and I saw the price tag, I went, oh man, that is just awful. That is not good. And I figured the only way I'm going to be able to save any money on this is if I do the build myself. And mind you, I've never built a motor before. I have no experience. I've changed an air filter a couple times. I changed my own oil, but that is it. I figured if I get to a point where I don't know what I'm doing, I can just bring it to a shop and they'll finish it up for me. It was coming around to winter time. December, January at this point, so it was cold in my shop. So I figured well, I could just build the motor in my apartment, you know, climate controlled, I have a fridge, shower, TV, wow, this is great. You know, this is the perfect, ideal place to build a motor. So sure enough, the short block came in. I put it on an engine stand right next to my fridge, brought all my parts, everything, all the parts, all the tools, and basically started down this unknown journey of, you know, which bolt goes where and which part do I need to stick where. People blow these things up all the time and rebuild them. It's pretty common. What they don't tell you is when you buy 30 different companies' aftermarket parts, you know, this part will tell you the instructions, assuming the rest of your engine is OEM, which is not. Figuring out how to get all these parts together, hoping I have the right gaskets, hoping I have the right bolts, hoping I have the right tools. I had to buy multiple tools. It was just a nightmare. After about 8 weeks, I finally finished the build, and I had this complete built motor sitting right there next to my fridge. Stuff everywhere, all over the island, all over the kitchen counters, table set up, all over the floor. I thought, well, how am I gonna get this motor out of here, you know? It's sitting on its engine stand, but we need to drive it across town and get it back to the car. So we picked up the engine stand and set it on a dolly, and we wheeled the dolly out to the garage, and then we sat the motor on the back of the truck, drove it across town. I dropped the motor in, all in one night actually. I finished the build up, and I was a bit weary knowing that I was going for 500 or 600 horsepower and that I had turned every bolt myself on that motor. It was a very unsettling feeling. So I did end up taking the car to a shop south of town. And he gave it a once over, made sure, you know, I put this bolt in the right place, made sure when he turned the motor over it wasn't going to shoot a piston out the side or something. There were a few minor issues. Some galley plugs were missing on the heads, so the first time he turned it over, it lost all 5 quarts of oil in about 3 seconds. And then we found out one of the injectors was not seated properly, just had to change the O-ring. It was just spitting fuel everywhere. And then I got a call one day, and he said, your car's done, come get it. I went down there, and after 9 long months of sleepless nights, having no idea what I was doing, the car was back on the road. So I did the typical break-in, 2,500 miles, you know, take it easy, downshift when you're slowing down, you know, racing oil. I had to burn probably 40 quarts of oil just on break-in. You have to change it 50 miles, 250 miles, 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles. And I finally mustered up the courage to take it in and get it tuned, you know, on E85. And sitting there watching them strap the car to the dyno, knowing every single tiny detail of that motor and knowing that I had to do everything felt really uncomfortable. But it ended up making 500 wheel horsepower, and that thing is just an absolute rocket ship. You know, going into this, I had no idea what I was doing. And I think diving in head first is the only way you ever learn anything. So all in all, the thing is a beast. So ultimately the goal with the car was to put a sequential gearbox in it, change the suspension over, and do a rally car. That was the dream, you know, 8 years ago, and that's still the dream today. But right now, as a road car, it's great. But it is tearing apart the drive shaft. I knew going into the build, if I did anything more than the stock 300 horsepower, you know, everything's not really made for it if it's new, and especially 10 years later, 120,000 miles, you know, the drivetrain, everything is rusty, all the couplings. I had suspicions that it was going to happen, you know, some of the drivetrain was going to fall apart. The hardest part of the build was the motor, and the motor was very high horsepower for a 2.5 liter. Being able to identify and fix any problems from here on out is going to be just part of the adventure. So I bought the car for $10,000. It was a 2009 STi hatch with 124,000 miles. A bit rough around the edges, you know, the body wasn't perfect. It's a Michigan car, it's a bit rusty. But I figured, okay, if I put $3,000 to $5,000 in this car, I'm still, you know, pretty comfortable. As soon as I realized I wanted to do a built short block, the turbo and the clutch and the flywheel, all good for 650 horsepower. I was talking about $8,000 at that point, on top of the 10 that I already spent for the car. And the final build, after everything was said and done, was about 16,000 in parts and another 6 in tuning, help from other people, just miscellaneous cost. So the total all-in price for the car, $10,000 for the car, $22,000 for the build. It's a $32,000, 500 wheel horsepower, all-wheel drive rocket ship. I took it up to the mountains, you know, probably 10 times since I built it, and it's amazing.
True negotiation starts with finding the right car, and the best way to do that is with Autotempest.com. Autotempest allows you to compare the results from Craigslist nationally with all the top listing sites. So visit Autotempest.com today and see where your next dream car is hiding.